we're going to be hearing about how how 3 places and 3 organisations are really engaging young people and the next generation in their work. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, David Coughlin, to chair the session, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hello. Thank you very much, Ellie. I just caught the end of that last session, so we'll definitely be going back to have a proper listen because it sounded very interesting. So I'm David Coughlin. I'm a project manager for the Future Parks Accelerator team at the National Trust. I have a background in youth services for disabled young people, but more recently I was managing all of the children and young people work at Mordenhall Park for the National Trust in South London. That was really about trying to give a sense of ownership to young people over the park specifically, but working in partnership with community organisations to try and encourage the National Trust to act as one part of a green space and third sector network for young people across Merton. So I'm really excited to be introducing these 3 speakers representing projects and places that engage with a vast range of young people from early years up to entering the world of work, and from Plymouth in the southwest, through Bradford to projects all across Scotland. So we have Jill Thorner, Head of Programme at Better Start Bradford, Angela Horton, the Young Place Changers Programme Lead, and Nigel Cotterill, the Project Manager for Plymouth Natural Grid, here to share their experiences. So we often hear that children and young people are somehow custodians of a future Earth or things to be prepared or improved for real life as an adult, but they're also inhabitants of this current Earth, good enough right now in their own right. It's important, therefore, that we engage them on their own terms now to improve their lives in the present, maybe with half an eye on future goals. And these 3 projects have been doing exactly that, meeting people where they are to realise present benefits together and define and implement long-term outcomes in co-production with the young people that they serve. We give cities and green and natural spaces their meaning by how we use them, but we still operate within the bounds of what urban planners, highways agencies, engineers, architects, and various other private and public sector actors set out. And young people are too frequently disregarded in the decisions that shape how public space is designed and maintained, and they're almost never involved in making those decisions. So the 3 projects we're going to hear from in this session are all thinking carefully about how the voices of young people can be amplified and mainstreamed into the development and management of urban nature. So without too much talk from me, I'm going to pass over to Jill Thorner, Head of Programme, to talk to us about Better Place Bradford. So Jill, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, and thank you for inviting us to the conference, and we're really delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of our programme. My name is actually Jill Thornton. I'm not sure how that went wrong, but if anybody needs to get hold of me afterwards, then it's at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to talk about our Better Place project, which is our environment project that's part of our bigger programme. So if we could start the presentation, I can explain a little bit about the programme and then how the Better Place project came about, and what we've been doing, and what's going to happen next, and what we're learning from it. So, as I said, I'm Jill Thornton, I'm Head of Programme, and I've been involved with our programme right from the very beginning. So I was Project Manager for our National Lottery bid. So if we move on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about Better Start Bradford. So a £215 million programme introduced by the lottery in 2013. There are 5 sites across the country, and we in Bradford got just under £50 million for our 10 years. And it's about improving outcomes for children, but it's very much a test and learn programme. So understanding what works and trying to build on that, build the evidence base and secure investment for improved outcomes around speech and language, social and emotional development, and nutrition and health. And it includes pregnant women. So we are looking at 0 to 3s and pregnant women for our programme. So I think the question really is where does Better Place fit into that? So if we move on to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about that. So why Better Place? Our programme's always been about talking to parents and understanding from parents what their needs are, what the sort of things are that they feel will benefit their children, improve their children's outcomes, and the support that they need. And in 2013, we got together with all our system leads and our parents, about 70 people altogether, half of them parents. And the strong message from the parents is if their children's health and well-being was going to improve, they needed to have a nicer place to grow up. They needed to be in a healthier environment where they could play and be outdoors. We were working with Born in Bradford, who some of you will know about, at Bradford Institute for Health Research. And they shared with us some of their learning around the impact of harmful emissions, particularly on unborn babies. And so putting those two things together, we did, this was right at the very end of our planning for our programme, for our bid. We got together with the parents and produced our Better Place project proposal. And the basic principle was to improve access to play and green spaces, to have safe walking routes, reduce exposure to harmful emissions. And we felt that would address all of those, the programme outcomes, as well as improving the environment for the whole community. So that's what set us off. But I think this was really instigated by our parents, and that's important because it's a massive programme. So if we move on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more. So our approach in the Better Place project was it started from co-production, and I think it's worth noting there's about £5 million of our programme, including £2 million for capital projects, is our Better Place project. And the lottery allowed us to have that £2 million programme without any projects being identified in advance. So we were allowed to have a capital programme without any capital projects identified. They were all to be developed with our local communities and with local parents. And that's what we've done. So joint accountability, so very much all the partners who are involved in this are accountable to each other. Have a really significant programme of engagement, because if we were going to build these projects with our parents, we needed to know who they were, where they were, and what it is that was important to them and what would work for them. And use that lesson to try to embed the approach across the district. And this is an opportunity to try out new ideas and new ways to do things. And you know, there's not very much in terms of provision for children that focuses on this age group, so very much a learning opportunity. So if we move on, I'm going to talk a bit about our co-production approach. And it's kind of bespoke and it alters depending on what kind of project. But as I said, we start off with the community and learn from the community and understand what it is that matters to them and how they use things that they've already got. And then start thinking about building capacity amongst those groups, amongst our parents in particular, so that they could be part of the leadership and make the changes themselves or direct the changes. And then work with us on the design of the Better Place projects, and very much hands-on, and that includes our children. Our children have been part of that right from the beginning. And then they were worked alongside us to build the Better Place, so to get these projects delivered and off the ground. And through that, building a legacy for the community to be proud of. And that's important because once you've done that, then you've got something that's got genuine sustainability. So if we could move to the next slide. And we started, the little map there is, the drawn map is our area. And we started very early on working with one of our partners, the Landscapes Division in the local authority, to do a landscape framework map, which told us what we'd got. So it sort of gave us a baseline for our entire project. So I'll move on and talk a little bit about what happened as a result of that. So next slide, please. I haven't got very long left, I'm sorry. So basically, this is a few slides that illustrate what we did. This play area was really unloved, and so we've changed it into a play area. And parents told us what they wanted, and we put that in right next to our building here. We move on to the next one. Bigger project, working in partnership with the local authorities to improve things in a local park, and really the designs the children helped develop the designs here. So could move on to the next one. And this is what came about as a result of that, and there's some explanatory text there. So the designs, the children helped to do the designs, and we got a sculptor to build them. We move on. This is one of our walkways, so this is one of our routes. So each of these illustrates one of the principles, getting from a council estate to a local school and to the local park. And it was horrible, you can see from the original photograph, and now it's beautiful and people look after it. So it's not being subject to antisocial behaviour and neglect in the way that we would have expected. So if we move on. Tree and shrub planting to improve the air quality. in partnership with the local authority and with other programmes, and this one appeared on the telly, so that was really good. If we can move on to the next one, and this is Natural Play in Bowland Park. It's very similar to Horton Park, but different kind of things. If we move on again, next slide. And this was a route through the woods that nobody ever used because it was scary and dark and unpleasant. So we just created a pathway and created an opening at the other end, put some sculptures in, and it's now used by everybody. And people love it. And those woods have opened up as a result of doing this. And it's parents that told us that was what they wanted. If we move on. And I'll move on from this slide, but this is basically all the things that were considered when we were doing it. As I mentioned, we worked with Born in Bradford, and they've helped us to do a lot of evaluation and build evidence around the benefits of the work that we're doing, and we expect that to develop even further. So we've come to the last slide. Oh, and this describes some of the barriers and enables some of the research that we've done that helps us to develop some of the projects. So move on to the next slide. I'm nearly there. In partnership has been critical. We wouldn't have been able to do this. And you can see from all these logos, these are all the people we've worked with who've helped us to deliver this project. And as the text says, it helps us to secure commitment, unblock blockages, create sustainable change, and link the things directly to the parents and the community. So the final slide is what about the future? So we've created things that are sustainable in terms of the equipment. We've addressed areas where antisocial behaviour was an issue. We've created routes that are safe for people to use, that are away from the roads. We've maintained improvements on limited resources. We've got some work in our engagement project supporting landowners in maintaining the sites, and have local volunteers helping to do that too. Help to build friends of groups, use social prescribing as a way of getting commitment to the sites. And we've got a phase 2 project that's embedding the change, building that commitment, and hopefully sharing that experience more widely across the district so that it will become a standard thing. And I just want to mention finally, I'm sorry I've run over a bit, but our Better Place manager, Adele, has been significant in making this happen. She's brought landscape architect skills to oversee the capital programme, but she's also brought a community environment background, and remarkably brought an understanding of early childhood development, so that the things that we've built have been significant in meeting our children's development needs and play needs. So thank you for listening, and hopefully you found that quite interesting and a sort of snapshot of our project. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Jill Thornton, and apologies, that was my poor note-taking. Got your name wrong, so I accept responsibility for that one. Yeah, that's like such an inspirational example of putting those green spaces really local to children. And as someone was saying on the first day, sort of greening a route just to school can make such a difference, those everyday interactions. And I think a very interesting point about the freedom that the capital funding without identified projects gave you, so that can be really co-designed with the families is really important. So now we're going to hear from Angela Horton, who is the lead for the Young Place Changers project at Green Space Scotland. So Angela, please take it away.
Good morning, everybody. So my name's Angela Horton, and I have been working with Green Space Scotland for the past 4 years, helping develop the Young Place Changes programme. Thank you to the organisers for inviting me here to present some information about that programme. Next slide, please. So children and young people, we worked with young people from 12 to 25, are often not involved in the decision-making process about the places in which they live. The Young Place Changes programme was developed to put young people in the heart of their communities. It also helped introduce them to professionals in both the built and natural environment. And it helped turn around the perceptions of young people being the issue in an area to being part of the solution for our urban and green spaces. Next slide, please. Young Place Changes programme puts young people in a lead role, giving them the opportunity to plan and lead in their own local projects and improving and making use of different spaces across green spaces and urban areas. It was funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund and part funded by Scottish Government, who provided funds for us to then give the projects small parts of funding to work on their ideas. Next slide, please. The programme is all about training in placemaking and peer facilitation. We introduce young people to place terms and look at community placemaking. We adapted this through a youth work approach in our partnership with Youth Scotland. All the training sessions were filled with lots of fun activities to keep young people interested, and lots of the work we took outside, and we used simple tools to keep young people motivated, and they helped us develop tools as we worked through the programme. Next slide, please. So the process, we introduce young people to what is a great place? What are all these ideas around what makes a great place? We use place evaluations, and you'll see in the photograph simple things like green frames and red frames taken outside with cameras, taking photographs so that we could then go back and look at, so what was good green frames, what wasn't so good red frames. And then from there, we go into mapping. So it's very much getting into paper, pens, lollipop sticks, you name it. That fun things just to play with for a while. And we map out the areas and we look at, well, what's good about that? What's not so good about that? And what could we change about those spaces? Through this whole thing, we're helping manage the expectations of the young people too. Because let's face it, we could come up with some grand ideas, but we also need to sort of scale it back to achievable goals for young people to help them see that we can change things in the areas. The young people from this group lived in a quite rural area in Scotland, and they helped develop blether benches. So blether is people to sit and have conversations in their town centre. Next slide, please. From September, we were working with the Edinburgh Thrive and Green Spaces team at Edinburgh Council, who were undertaking a master planning process for Inverleith Park. I came along and worked with two local groups, a local youth group and young people at the secondary school near the park. Next slide, please. That's the park itself. So I went along and ran some sessions, and we looked at the park and what we could do in the park. We also looked at what young people already thought about, how they used the park with their families, with their friends, and talked to other people about how they used the park. So there's already a very active Friends of group in that park already. Next slide, please. So using the tools, we looked at other areas. What inspired young people? What were their ideas of good places? And contrary to popular belief, not all young people want skate parks. They want places where they can come together with their friends. And we spoke about gender neutral spaces and places where everybody is welcome and places for wildlife. Next slide, please. The young people were so excited by using this process, and we spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what can we do in this park to make it better for not just young people and children, but all people who use the park. So they looked at particularly places that were safe for young girls and women, so lighting up, solar pathways for young people, places for wildlife and biodiversity, and places where they could be part of a team. Next slide, please. The Young Place Changers Toolkit you'll find on our website. It gives you lots of handy tools to use and activities, place evaluations, how you can map your community, and how you can help be involved with the circles of influence in your community. Next slide, please. We also worked with a group of young artists in Glasgow who developed this toolkit, which is This Must Be Our Place. This is a really good one. They worked with their young people on this toolkit, and it's full of really fun games to look at and develop how you can interact and be active in your own space. Next slide, please. So thank you for that. The toolkit's also adaptable. I'm working with a group of young people, climate champions in Perth, to look at climate adaptation. So it's really useful and could be adapted to lots of different scenarios. The toolkit's available from those links. Thank you, that's me.
Thanks very much, Angela. I have had a look through that toolkit, and it's something that I wish I knew about before I moved away from working specifically and entirely with young people, because it would have been very, very useful. Yeah, I also love that quote about the visible presence of young people as a sign of healthy human habitats. I was going to include that in my introduction, so I'm glad I didn't. And then I think this is a really like a really positive example of how to engage young people in and young people of this specific age when they're starting to widen their horizons and give the world around them a bit of meaning. It's a very positive and constructive way to sort of engage them and hear about what they're thinking, whilst, as you say, managing expectations slightly. So finally, we're going to hear from Nigel Cotterill, who is the project manager for the Plymouth Natural Grid project, and I will let him explain all about that to you. Nigel.
Hello, everybody. I'd just like to introduce you to Plymouth Natural Grid. It's an 18-month partnership. The project involves Plymouth City Council, who I work for, the National Trust, and a local organisation called Real Ideas. It ends next March. It's only 18 months, so it's been pretty quick. We had to work quite hard to get it off the ground and get it running, but so far it's achieved some pretty amazing things, which I'll talk about as we progress through the presentation. So there's 3 core strands to the project: biodiversity net gain, engagement and education, and the Kickstarter program that's kind of integrated into the other 2 strands. So the idea with biodiversity net gain is that it's a cornerstone of our habitat banking vehicle development, and you'll be hearing a bit more about that this afternoon from some other of my colleagues. The Kickstarters fed into that, and we used sort of engagement activities to engage children from kind of primary school age upwards in some of the activities we were carrying out. If we can move on to the next slide, I'd just like to show you a short video which was made in the midpoint of the project, which kind of illustrates a lot of the things we've done. Great, thanks very much. That's short and sweet, but pretty much encapsulates most of the elements. If we can move on to the next slide. Oh, we're here. Great. Okay, so we'll talk about Kickstarters in a bit more detail shortly, but I'd just like to sort of share that we were very pleased to have won the National Kickstarter Award for Promoted Diversity and Inclusion. Our project was selected by the Department of Work and Pensions to represent this region, and we attended an award ceremony in London and came away with the National Award, which was great. It's been recognised by the DWP as being one of the most successful Kickstarter projects generally for enrolment, retention, and also progression. And it was the most successful project regionally. Next slide, please. So what is PNG? As I said, it involves the three different strands. It's quite an innovative partnership, as it's effectively a team of National Trust and Plymouth City Council staff, all working under me, who's employed by Plymouth City Council, based at a Plymouth City Council facility, but with a National Trust Ranger team. So it consists of youth workers, conservationists, and project officers, working with a range of different audiences to sort of promote our biodiversity net gain work and just to raise awareness generally about the environment and the green spaces in the city. So the project targets include a 10% biodiversity net gain on 10 Plymouth City Council sites, predominantly local nature reserves, and 2 National Trust sites in the city. This was to be achieved while training 15 Kickstart placements and engaging with communities across the city through formal and informal opportunities, delivering opportunities for healthy exercise, social interaction, and educational activities. Next slide, please. So Green Thinkers is a pilot project which was hosted by Real Ideas, who were the other partnership organisation in the project. It's a 6-week taster where young people could attend 2 days a week for 6 weeks, carry out a variety of activities outdoors to see whether or not they liked working outside and to get an idea of the range of jobs that are available in that environment. One thing we did find was there's a big skills gap, and young people often don't get the opportunity to find out whether they'd be interested in following a route into horticulture, conservation, outdoor leisure, or the other kind of employment opportunities that exist. So this project was initially set up as a pilot, and then people could transition into Plymouth Natural Grid if they were interested. Next slide, please. Our community engagement programme was run by a dedicated project officer. The majority of that work happened in spring and summer 2022, and the Natural Grid staff and the Kickstarters actually delivered those projects. So they went into primary schools, they went into secondary schools and worked with all ages up to groups that hosted people who had dementia. The list of activities was varied, included the usual walks and talks, but we also did ID workshops, practical activities, tree planting, and environmental arts and crafts. Some headline figures just to put out there. Staff and Kickstarters engaged with over 1,700 people. We had a target of 1,000. Engaged with 800 children. We had a 500 target. Delivered 31 formal activities when our target was 20. 19 of those took place in the most deprived areas of the city. The activity that's shown there shows our Natural Grid team working with Pollinize, who are a local community interest company that first started working with the council via Future Parks. They provide wildflower seeds to local schools. Each school in the city receives some seeds, and our team went in to help those schools sow the seeds on their green space. Sometimes that involved building planters because there wasn't any green space, and sometimes that involved us improving the land before the seeds were sown. One primary school who was short of space decided they would like to improve the biodiversity of an area of grass in a local park that many of them walk through on the way to school. So we worked with the Plymouth City Council Street Services Department to earmark a piece of grass we could do that on. The children sowed the seeds, and the grass cutting schedule was adapted to allow the seeds to grow in a meadow style. Go to the next slide, please. The key element of our education work was the Junior Urban Ranger certificate. And the certificate itself was actually made out of seed paper, which you might have briefly seen in the introductory video. There's a reproduction of it in the middle of that slide. The children could earn that after undertaking a biodiversity improvement activity, which showed they understood the work they'd done and what kind of impact that would have locally and globally. The certificate could be planted and it grew. And in case the children wanted to keep a certificate, we put a QR code on the back so they could scan that into a phone and then download a digital badge, which obviously they could keep. It was very popular, could be adapted for a range of different activities, and we ended up awarding over 200 Junior Urban Ranger seed paper certificates to a variety of different groups. Next slide, please. So Kickstarter training. Over the life of the Kickstarter team, we had 15 placements, and they stayed with us for 6 months. 2 days a week worked on practical conservation, engagement, and education activities. They spent a day a week as well working with our project partners, Real Ideas, undertaking personal development activities. In addition to classroom-based activities, they were encouraged to carry out self-directed learning and research. And we also had some field trips arranged, including to the one you can see on the left there at the Eden Project in Cornwall, visiting partnership projects that were run in a similar style there, and showing them the kind of range of employment opportunities that were available in kind of horticulture, conservation, and associated industries. So we hosted 10 Kickstarters over autumn and winter 21-22, and their work was primarily practical conservation. And then we hosted another 5 over spring and summer 2022, and they were mainly involved in the engagement programme. So we adapted the enrolment and kind of advertising process to attract audiences that are interested in those particular things. Some headline figures from the Kickstarter programme. We had 15 overall, 10 male and 5 female, which compared favourably with the existing street services parks department, 96% of whom were male. 12 out of 15 of them, which is 80%, lived in the most deprived wards of the city. 4 out of the 15, which is 25%, reported a physical health issue on enrolment. 4 out of 15 reported mental health issues on enrolment, and 9 out of 15 reported an educational achievement level of 3 or below. And in addition to the work experience and training, the Kickstarters received a lot of input was required from the Ranger team regarding pastoral care and personal support. So it was a bit more than just work experience. So on the next slide, please. So there's some quotes there from our Kickstarters that progressed. A lot of these guys had never really considered working outdoors, hadn't considered a career in the green sector. But as you can see from the slide, that they benefited massively in terms of personal confidence and skills, and it helped them focus on what they wanted to do with the kind of rest of their lives, really. Can I have the next slide, please? There's a couple more of our guys that have progressed on to be trainee rangers. So 2 Kickstarters progressed into employment as assistant rangers with the National Trust. 2 Kickstarters progressed on to countryside worker apprenticeships with the National Trust. 1 Kickstarter is employed by Plymouth City Council as an urban ranger in Central Park, and 2 more apprenticeship opportunities are available via Plymouth City Council for countryside worker candidates. So we're looking at a kind of progression rate of 50% into either further training or employment in a related industry, which we're really pleased with. And what we've learned, well, the project runs until March 2023. We've got a full programme of biodiversity improvements to complete, and that will obviously improve the climate resilience of the city and contribute towards our green finance work with the generation of biodiversity net gain credits. We have learned that recruitment is key. When we recruited the team, we recruited youth and community workers as well as conservationists. They're an amazing team and they're the key to the success of the project. And the partnership projects work, the synergies that we've got working with the National Trust bring more than the kind of sum of its parts, really. And I think that is the key learning thing, is to, particularly in today's sort of environment of financial restrictions, that partnering with other organisations builds resilience and just gives you different angles and different ways of thinking about things you might not have done yourself. And the key thing we learned really is that Plymouth residents have a real interest and desire to see improvements in the green spaces of the city and enjoy the opportunity to work with the National Trust as well as the council. That kind of mix of staff really helps break down some barriers that often exist when you try to interact with residents as a local authority.
Nigel, could I just check you're on the way to wrapping up?
Yep, I'm pretty much
Thanks.
there. So yeah, that's kind of it, really. That's the last project. Obviously, be open to questions.
Oh, you really were just there. I'm sorry, I interrupted the flow of your very last sentence. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I mean, those Kickstart retention and progression rates and the range of people that you managed to engage through that is hugely impressive. And again, that along with both of the other projects just sort of demonstrated the huge range of partners that are necessarily involved in these kinds of projects. So if I could ask all of those on the panel who've just shared to turn their cameras back on, we have, I think, a good amount of time for questions because you're all fairly strict about your timings, which was excellent. So I'd just like to start off getting an idea from you all why you think this work is particularly important now at this time. So maybe Jill, we could start with you.
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of reasons, but health inequalities is a significant problem for our communities, and we work in, you saw the map being in the city of Bradford, and having healthy spaces to be in and healthy air to breathe, and we've just adopted a clean air zone in Bradford, can make a significant difference. But I think there's a little bit more to it than that, and it's about people feeling that where they live is of value and is valued, and that helps them to feel more positive about it as well. And so I think there's a range of really important benefits from the sort of work we've been doing. And as I said during the presentation, that came from our parents. They told us that.
Great, thanks very much, Jill. And Angela.
So it's really important to work with children and young people, especially when you think about the mental health stats surrounding young people. And we know the benefits of working outdoors and in green spaces. But obviously, climate anxiety, I find with a lot of the young people when we're talking about climate change, they actually really want to be involved. And not just as a tick box or as, you know, another consultancy from other people. Well, let's find out, but actually physically involved projects, hands dirty, being in there and doing things that that they want to see a positive change and a turnaround.
Yeah, I think that's really important that we acknowledge that climate anxiety point, because it is obviously something that is ever present for all of our young people growing up, and I think the task can seem so huge. There was a conversation in the National Trust recently about the recent series of Frozen Planet, and that people had seen that and that they didn't feel like there was much answers to it. But I think, exactly like you say, like small things that we can get young people involved in, so they can see a small difference at least where they live, and give them an idea about the impact they can have on a wider scale. So Nigel, what is your take on why this is particularly important now?
I think we kind of were aware of it, but what we also discovered is there's a big skills gap. The older age group I'm talking about now, really, our Kickstarters, of people not having the opportunity to experience working in conservation or horticulture or the outdoor environment, because the funding just isn't there. I mean, many moons ago when I did my training, you could choose from 4 colleges within kind of commuting distance that you could go and learn about those things, and now you can't. You have to travel to a different county. Our apprenticeships are delivered by Bridgewater College, which is 2 counties away, because there just isn't the funding to deliver a lot of the courses. So what we did was give people an understanding that they could get involved in a positive way. It wasn't a big mystery, and that you can actually get engaged and deliver sort of local benefits, which will have a kind of global impact, I think, and just get people to think about it as a possible career. It's not really publicised very much. It's essential that we have that kind of skills base, going forward. And there aren't massive amounts of opportunity to get involved in it.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of leads me onto something that I was sort of struck by in all of your presentations, was that there's sort of a thread about learning between all of them, I think, and that like non-formal learning outside of school, and Nigel, to an extent with yours inside college, but also sort of workplace learning, and then through play in Bradford, and through just learning a completely new way of looking at the world with Green Space Scotland. I wonder if any of you have any particular thoughts on what role that plays in engaging young people of all different ages.
Just
Jill,
a couple of things. One is for our children, the things that we've created with our families have been designed to develop children's learning, so to develop their verbal skills, their physical skills, and also their sort of play skills, which are really important before they start school. I think there's another element to it as well, which is the process gives them some agency in the world around them, and that applies obviously to the parents and the children, and that's really significant learning for them as they grow up, but also for their families and the local communities in thinking about how they can influence other things. And so I think there's a number of learning benefits to it.
Can I just add to that throughout the programme we had a skills bank of professionals too. So we introduced young people to those professionals, like landscape architects, planners, you name it. And it made these people who are making the big decisions around them human people that they could interact with. So that was really good for learning too.
Yeah, amazing. Nigel, is there anything you'd like to add of particular?
Yeah, well, I think we obviously made the activities fun when we were working with the primary school children, but it was a bit more about the impact they could have on their local environment. So, for example, the wildflower seed sowing we did in their local park that they all walk through on the way to school. There's a very immediate and kind of positive change that took place in there. That they went into that park, sowed the seeds, and then within months they've got a riot of colour in there, and they can walk past that every day and say we did that, and they know why they've done it as well. The actual activity was quite fun. It got them out of the classroom, got them out of the school, having a sort of an impact on their local environment. So I think with that realization that they can do something positive quite easily in their local green space is a big benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sort of linked to all of that, I think there's a point that we need to acknowledge that if we're going to have like mutually respectful relationships with children, young people, or any sort of communities, that we need to understand what we're learning from them as well. So we're getting quite short on time, and I'd like to give you some time to talk about advice for other people. But is there anything sort of specific nuggets that anyone got from the projects that they've been delivering, or the young people that have been working with, that you've learned from them?
Definitely. I would say be prepared to be really surprised about what you can learn from the young people. They don't see the red tape or the bureaucracy. And they always come away with some amazing ideas that you're like, why didn't we think of that? It's just some simple, really creative ideas.
Yeah.
And also be patient. Especially we worked with youth groups across Scotland, and as we know, youth work services have been cut all across the UK, and they've already got a huge amount of work on their plate. So it's about showing them the benefits of how young people could be involved in it, and working to support the groups as well, the best
Absolutely.
you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Jill, I can see you've come off mute.
Just seeing how our children use the things that we've done and the things that they've helped to design. And I think that, with children, especially very little children, they will always find different ways to do things. And I think it just is kind of the proof of the pudding, really, that what we've done it's working for those children, because they do use all the things that we've done in such different ways. But they also tell us how much they love them. And I think that's really, really important. And if you get that feedback, then you know that you're getting it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nigel?
I think it's treat people as individuals, really. Our Kickstarter group obviously all had their progression targets, and one of the chaps in the group's target was to come to work without his hood up on his hoodie, and it took 4 months, but eventually he did it, and the only way was up from there onwards. So everyone gets something different out of all these programs, and it might not be immediately obvious.
Yeah.
And one last thing, if you're writing bids, make sure your revenue funding's in there, because it's all about the people at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the number of conversations I've had with people, not necessarily about hoodies, mainly about trainers, of not wanting to put boots on, but also not wanting to get trainers muddy, is a constant challenge. So just, I've taken up all the time because I wanted to get all your thoughts on those things, but if I could just ask you again, as they did in the last session, for a very short, snappy piece of advice that you'd give to others, fellow practitioners who are wanting to make a start in this area, what would that be, Jill?
Just make sure you've got the right people involved at the beginning, and that's the people who will benefit from what you're trying to do. Yeah,
perfect. Thank you. Angela?
Have lots of pizza. Lots of fun. Lots of pizza, lots of fun, and you'll find that there's lots of freedom, and opens up your heart working in these environments with young children.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nigel?
Partnerships, really. That was the main thing we've taken from our projects. Working in partnership with the NT and Real Ideas has made it what it is. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much, all three of you, for your time and for sharing your projects. I think if a child or young person could somehow live in a magical city where all three of these things could provide this sort of scaffold through their whole life, they would surely turn out purely engaged with what was going on around them and ready to save the world. So I'm going to pass back to Ellie just to wrap up this morning's session and take us for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, Jill, Angela and Nigel. What a great morning. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. So a fantastic set of insights and examples and expertise on how to unleash community power. Just a few, I can't really sum up because the richness was brilliant, but there's just a few things I think just in reflection that I take away, and we'd love to know your thoughts as well. You've been giving us some really rich feedback, and please don't stop. There's something that everyone's looking at in terms of changing the system, and just really recognizing that takes time. To be patient, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And actually the behavior and the culture change that requires patience and the real nurturing of relationships, particularly with a whole diversity of partners and particularly your communities. There's something really brilliant about the value of openness that so many of our speakers embodied, an openness of a mind about what's possible, an openness of heart, as you just said, and an openness to new ideas, new ways of doing things, and openness to working with completely different people. But that value, I think, is at the heart of so much of what the FPA programme has done, but also in Bradford, we visited you recently, and what an amazing programme that you're running there. There's a brilliant mentality about just do it. I love, where is your pale green dot? The kind of the just do it, to be honest, is the FPA team tattoo. It's I wasn't going to share that, but I will. The starting small, trialing, learning. Yes, there's failing, but that failing is a rich part of the learning, and then thinking about the scaling. But yeah, just do it. And the Tim Gill quote, I think it was Angela that mentioned it, that children as an indicator species of cities. Absolutely, we should have that as the DNA of the programme and whatever happens next. And then just finally to finish, great places need great people. Really came through in every example. And what does that mean for the investment and the empowerment of staff and of volunteers, of community leaders, and of kind of new recruits to the movement? You're all talking about really passionately about including so many more audiences in your cities and your towns, and they are all really part of the big team that we're going to need to really bring our communities to the heart, parks and parks to the heart of communities. So thank you very much for a really brilliantly inspiring morning.